Funding for Off 90 is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.
Cruising your way on this episode of Off 90. We revisit an abstract artist. We talk to a photographer from Minneapolis who prefers old-fashioned techniques. And we learn about an unorthodox religious group in Northfield. It's all just ahead, Off 90. Hi, I'm Barbara Keith. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Off 90. We dropped in on Paul Walech-Roth, an artist we featured previously on Off 90. Since our last visit with Paul, he has completely changed his style and the way he approaches a painting. We talked with Paul and learned what he's been up to recently.
They'll think either greatly of it or they're like, oh, he's just throwing paint on there. I'm not going to buy that. So I guess I'm giving my secret away on this. So I'm Paul Walech-Roth, and I'm an artist. I gravitate towards the abstract expressionists. What I learned both in Winona and Chicago from painting instructors that were quite versed and very successful, try to limit your palette and try to be able to get a mastery of that. Later in 2016, I did a series of paintings that are black, white, and copper. A lot of times I try to limit whatever I'm painting to 2 or 3 different colors. You know, there's a contrast between these two. This is a much louder or more active painting, and this one's a quieter painting. And I try not to overpaint because a lot of times when something's raw and left as it is, it's typically a little bit stronger and it has more visual impact. A lot of times when people paint, it's an additive and a subtractive process. When I put paint on, that's additive. When I scrape it or I take it off or dab it or use like a solvent to reduce it, then it's a subtractive process. So I try to be active in terms of being additive and subtractive in the painting process and all that stuff. When I start the painting, I do not always know how it's going to end. And I'm a little bit happier with that because I believe that life is a dynamic process. Painting should reflect that. One that for myself, there's randomness in the world and all that. There's things that we just don't have an explanation. We try to explain things in human terms, but in terms of the universe and all that, it's completely independent of whatever lines, imaginary-wise, we put on them. So I want my work to be real and have a sense of life with it, to be spontaneous and very physical. Okay, so I know basically when a painting's done in 2 terms. One, I look at it and intellectually it makes sense. There's like, it has like a certain statement or a certain effect or impact that I see. And then I have to, more or less, I have to trust my instincts. And it tells me, don't do anything more, you're gonna goof it up. I get to a point where when I'm painting them, they're not working out. Like the black, white, and copper series I painted for maybe 2 to 3 months. And all of a sudden I just started like getting paintings that were like I was less happy with, so it's time to make a change. On the whole, people respond to, I think, if there's beauty in something that was stated and happened, even people that don't particularly like abstracts seem to respond more positively to my work than not. I want to be an honest painter. I want it to be my painting, nothing that's kind of like contrived or something.
Twin Cities photographer Timothy G. Piotrowski shuns modern digital photography. Instead, he uses analog processes, such as film natives and darkroom chemicals. Piotrowski specializes in photographing women's clothing in historical settings using antique equipment. We visit him in his studio and darkroom to learn about his process.
Well, I can't explain really even what my draw is to it. I mean, I'm just sort of doing this because I'm crazy, I guess. My name is Timothy G. Piotrowski, and I am an artist who uses photography. The garment she's wearing is from about 1900. And then with her long hair, it's nice and period accurate. They would have wore stockings, they might have wore a hat. There's not too much about these pictures, even though they look really simple, that hasn't been thought through. And a big part of the thinking is that I'm really looked at a lot of period photographs. These are Edwardian fashion plates from their French couture. And they were made to be, I mean, almost like a catalog photograph would be today. I've become a collector of period prints, and if I want to do a Hollywood portrait, you know, a picture that looks like a silent era Hollywood portrait, I literally have them in my collection. All of my pictures are very closely directed. What she's doing is she's just kind of holding this open, which is actually pretty risque. And so that's what we were kind of thinking about, was that there was this irony today that this is even a swimsuit. It wouldn't probably occur to us because it looks so much like a dress, but it is a Victorian era swimsuit.
I love working with Tim is because he's very accurate with his photos, he's very precise, and he makes sure that the images that he produces really do look authentic and they really are believable. So you kind of feel like as a model you kind of go back in time and you're a blank canvas that then is transformed into this period that you've never lived in.
Right now what I'm looking at, if you go in full profile to either direction, you see how the light moves on her face as she moves it from side to side. So instead of moving the light, I will direct the face and see how the light falls on her face as she moves it. I have a slow speed film and I'm using it under lower light. So I end up with exposures anywhere from 4 to 7 or 8 seconds.
You really have to be very, very still and be patient, you know, Tim is very precise and I appreciate that about him.
This is now my oldest lens. This is a Civil War era lens. It's a lens from about 1867 or so, or 1870. It's weird that I'm even this involved in this stuff as I am, because I'm not a very precise guy. I mean, it's not who I am. It's there a little, it's subtle, it's nice. Could be a nice print, actually. Here is what I spent the better part of the day yesterday. I printed this 19 times. So I had 19 prints just to arrive at a print where I felt like I was in that range where I was getting that tonal diversity that I wanted. You know, I love old photographs, and for me, kind of hitting one out of the park is when I feel like they really do feel like the era is kind of coming through. It's almost something a little like an apparition. There's almost something a little spooky. We worked with some automobiles from 1906, and there were 3 sitters, and they were all wearing all period clothes, and they had shovels and lanterns that were all correct to period. And we were out in a place where there was no sign of modernity whatsoever. There was no power lines, there were wooden fences, dirt road. And the whole crew, everybody who was there was a point where we were all just kind of like, this is amazing. Like, it was trippy because it really felt like you were seeing something you shouldn't be able to see. a pretty bad anti-trend, and so there's a lot of things that when they even begin to take on any kind of popularity, I lose all excitement or enthusiasm for.
Thousands of years ago, Druids were the mystical religious leaders of the European tribes called Celts. Hardly a trace of their religion survives today. In the last half of the 20th century, a group of students from Carleton College in Northfield revived the religion of the Druids. We traveled to Northfield to learn about this group and what it means to be a modern Druid.
So this is all part of the RDNA, which is the Reformed Druids of North America, which was founded here at Carleton in 1963.
Well, I didn't have Druid robes. Well, I did have a beard.
What is a Druid? There are as many definitions as there are Druids. I think that's probably the best definition.
In many other campuses, they would be called pagans or Wiccans or neo-pagans or neo-Wiccans.
I mean to include all of the European branches.
I don't observe Druidry as a commitment, as like, it's not a religion to me as much as it's just a way of seeing the world. And so I think with that regard, it'll stay with me for the rest of my life.
I'm Mark Hyman. I'm part of the web team here at Carleton these days, but I was a student at Carleton back in the 1980s. I don't call myself a Druid, but I've had a lot of friends who were Druids here at Carleton, and kind of an interested observer. I'm really fascinated by religion, and especially how students confront religion and think about religion. Ultimately, a Druid is someone who is on a path of religious exploration, which has at its core a reverence for nature. It's about as pithy as I can be.
And the word Druid, we think, comes from like knowledge of the oak, because they would gather in these oak groves and like they had this kind of like spiritual connection to the forest.
Well, the story starts in the 1960s here at Carleton, when the college had a religious attendance requirement, which meant that students had to go to some kind of a religious service, and not only go to it, but they had to get documentation that they went. They had to have somebody sign a slip that said, so-and-so was at this service on this time, and they had to turn those into the college to make sure that they'd kept up the attendance requirement. And there were a lot of students as the 60s were getting started who felt that this was a little bit overbearing, a little bit too parental perhaps, and were looking for ways to creatively protest this requirement. And a group of students came up with this notion of, if we are required by the college to go to an organized religious service every week, what if we organized it ourselves? What if we made a protest that called into question the very nature of organized religion and forced the college to define what it meant by organized religion? So a small group of students sat down to figure out, okay, what can we do? What sort of a religion can we invent that we would be happy to attend? Because we've got to go every week. That's part of the deal. And the origin of the name Druid is actually kind of a joke, because one of the students who was part of the founding group was from a Jewish household, and he said that his parents often wrote down Druid when they were filling out forms that required them to put their religion, because they didn't feel like putting down Jewish on government forms, and the rest of the students thought that was really great. The problem was none of them knew anything about Druids. So they thought, well, let's call ourselves the Reformed Druids, because then we won't have to actually do any historical research and figure out what the original Druids did or believed. So the Reformed Druids of North America was the group that they invented as their fulfillment for their religious attendance requirement. And so they went out into the Carleton Arboretum, and they read through some rituals that they had written up, and they communed with nature. And they did this every week, and then they filled out the slip that said they had attended this religious service, and they turned it into the dean's office, and they hoped for the best.
I am Bardwell Smith. I've taught my whole career at Carleton College. I came here in 1960. I retired in 95. I am 89 years of age. And I have grown along with Carleton in ways that are, for me, wondrous and very joyful.
Bardwell Smith was something of a key player in this whole Druid story, whether or not he realized it at the time. He was here on campus as a professor of religion, and he was also the advisor of the Episcopal student group, from whom several of the student founders of Druidism came. To hear him tell the story, I think it was with some encouragement from Bardwell that those students actually embarked on this protest and formed the Druids as a way to protest the religious attendance requirement.
People used to come to the chapel on Sunday mornings when we still had a requirement, and the chaplain, David Maitland, was a wonderful person, and his sermons were great, and he often had guest speakers who were also equally good. But people were reading the comics. I mean, students came in reading the comics, and that was a soft core or kind of playful way of saying, look, we're here, we're fulfilling the requirement, but we aren't really paying attention to what's going on, even though the speaker was very good. They knew that I had some objections about the requirement too. And here I was kind of enforcing it. So I was delighted by their contesting this in a way which caught the imagination of people. And we finally decided that the requirement was not producing whatever it was supposed to accomplish. And I'm not sure what it was supposed to accomplish. But the Druids were in the background, and they were practicing their newfound faith as a new group. So that was, I think, a way to, raise the question of, you don't need to force religion, that there are people who take courses in religion or go to church on their own, but the Druids did it in a way that was very effective. And I can't say that they made the difference, but it was good to have a group like that raised the question.
So this is called the Book of Cattle Raids, also known as the Book of Reveling.
There are scriptures. There are scriptures. I have the book here. That's one of the fascinating things about Druidism. You wouldn't expect a tradition like this to have a written record.
Chapter the first. At this pagan spirit gathering of 1993, all the different Druids and neo-pagans did gather together to discuss how to pass the time.
What's fascinating about the documentary element of Druidism is that you can actually look back at these original documents and trace what is essentially a new religious movement from its earliest days through all of the growth pains and all of the different phases that it went through.
Tony the tailor did suggest that all take their stuffed toy cows, stuffed toy animals, and cowish-shaped decorations, and they did have a cattle raiding game. The rules were such. Chapter the second. Number 1. Only camps with cow-colored banners are playing.
Fairly eclectic, the group itself. So I think some are finding connection to friends and community, so part of it is about building community. And I think there's an element of fun too, so it's also about releasing that energy and finding ways to connect with other people, or in the case of the Druids, also with the rest of creation. I think being out in nature, always, through almost every tradition, there has been an element of finding beauty and peace and harmony than when in nature.
Yeah, we appreciate nature, but we don't like worship it in some sense of the word, as in like how other religions might perceive worship, but we just try and have fun for the purpose of having fun.
It's not really a religion, but it's most similar to one. It's spiritual, but not, we aren't being told what to do.
The honoring of our relationship to the environment, the inseparability really of human beings and other forms of existence from that environment, is a truth that we are now understanding in ways in which we really haven't before.
I think the Druid values are eternal, and I think they will always apply to Carleton student life. And I think most people can say that they felt like they've always been Druids, they just didn't know what word to place upon that feeling.
Well, shameless display was essentially what it was all about. If you could afford to have the latest fashion and show your wife off, everyone that saw her recognized that you were a man of wealth. It's called conspicuous consumption. My name is Colleen Gow. I'm a textile and clothing historian.
I want a light yellow. This is the colors I was trying to get yesterday. This is a beautiful print. This is going to turn out real nice. None of what you see in my pictures is enhanced by digital processes. My name is Timothy G. Piotrowski, and I am what I would call a period photographer.
I initially met Tim Piotrowski at the Rochester Country Club, where he gave a presentation of his photographs using actual garments from a museum. When I first discussed the 19th century fashion with Tim, I mentioned a book that I had used in my studies of fashion history, written by Valerie Steele, and it's called Fashion and Eroticism. And Valerie did her PhD project at Harvard on the theory that the erotic zones, or the erogenous zones of clothing for women, switched. Sometimes it was the ankle, sometimes it was the bosom, sometimes it was the knee, sometimes it was the waist. And Tim was quite entranced or fascinated by that idea to cooperate with me and to collaborate with me to make a series of photographs of 19th century fashion.
The project is called The Changing Erotic Zones, 150 Years of Women's Gowns.
The exhibit essentially follows fashion from 1800 through to the 1940s.
Her idea was that we would illustrate how those zones travel and migrate over time, and how sort of drastically they go from one place to another. I'm there, I'm pretty there, and I even have my focus, so. The backdrops are always, they remain constant. So you have a straight line to compare it to, and then the lines on the floor coming out help to describe volume. So you get to see a little bit, especially if I put like a hoop skirt or something like that there. So this is actually the proto piece for the Changing Erotic Zones. And it has, you see the white and black background and the horizontal piece where the backdrops meet the floorboards.
One, I think, of the biggest examples is from the time of the 1850s, when the waist was considered the most erotic zone. Well, that tended to sweep backwards, and we had the skirt at the front being very, very narrow, and the emphasis then was on the buttocks. And it seems completely counterintuitive that it should be moved from front to back, but there it is.
As we all know, in the 20s, the line becomes sort of very, very boyish figure becomes vogue and central. And if you look at the periods before that, it's anything but. It's very hourglass. And so the difference between those two couldn't be more drastic.
By the end of the Second World War, when women had been doing a lot of of men's work, and I put men's in quotation. They were working in factories, as you know, and in many different types of labor that they had to wear trousers to be comfortable and to be safe.
So what you see in the 1945 picture is a woman that, for me, looks like almost like an airline stewardess outfit.
The thing that is probably most important to learn is that indeed fashion has gradually advanced and has dropped away, hopefully, the ridiculous kinds of fashion that were found in the 19th century, because with the freedom of women to enter sports, to enter professions, to be educated just the same as men, to take part in business, to take part in all aspects of life, the freedom to choose clothing is also been right along with that other kinds of freedom. So I believe that today's fashion allows women to be whomever they decide to be.
That's all for this episode. If you enjoy programs like Off 90, please show your support by becoming a member of KSMQ Public Television. Keep local programming vibrant in southern Minnesota. Give us a call at 507-481-2095 or 1-800-658-2539 or sign up online at ksmq.org. Thanks for watching. Join us next time. Off 90.